Hello, and welcome to today's conversation, A Better Meeting, presented by Zoom. I'm Bennett Richardson, General Manager of Protocol. Thank you for joining us. At Protocol, we aim to arm you as decision makers in technology, business, and policy with actionable news and analysis that can help you do your job. Today, we're going to talk about meetings. The only thing people can seem to agree on with meetings is that they don't love them and they aren't usually run correctly. Today is a rare moment to actually make the changes you've wanted to for years, and our panel of experts will tell you how. Our guests will share the best tools for hybrid meetings, best practices for making sure everyone has a voice, and the best ways to know when a meeting should probably just be an email. In the next phase of work, bringing people together is more important than ever. We can do it without wasting people's time. Hope you'll join the conversation by tweeting your questions with #ProtocolWorkplace. And if you're not already subscribed, don't forget to sign up for the Protocol family of newsletters at protocol.com/newsletters. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome Ronnie, Enterprise Customer Success Manager at Zoom. Ronnie works with some of Zoom's largest customers to help them run better meetings. So who better to help us kick off today's conversation? Welcome, Ronnie.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's great to be here.
So let's kick things off with the question that I think I've wanted to ask for at least a year now. How does Zoom use Zoom?
Well, of course, that's a great question. Zoom uses Zoom in a lead by example way, I hope. We're always evaluating the best ways to deliver happiness to our customers and want to make sure they have that optimal experience. This means right now, we've been utilizing what we call a Meet Better framework around 3 A's. And those 3 A's are essentially every meeting should have an agenda with the right attendees and capture action items in real time. Wrapped around this simple framework, we also introduced agenda templates. We surveyed our Zoomies to see what would be most beneficial, and we produced 3 of them, and they are really beneficial in making sure that you're staying on track and that you know, again, that you have the right agenda, you have the right people in the room, and you're taking away action items. We actually further supplemented this 3A framework by creating a decision map or a decision tree, which you referenced. Do I really actually need to have a meeting? Could this be accomplished elsewhere? So that's been very popular and helpful. We also internally leverage persistent chat. So that allows us to send a traditional typed message, share files and things like that. But we also have found that recording a quick audio message in IM can be really effective and expeditious as well. And oftentimes that's how we communicate with our customers. Again, we also here at Zoom have the benefit of the full suite of solutions, including Zoom Phone. We do have a lot of users on Zoom Phone right now, where you can dial or text right from your desktop client or mobile app when you need to have a conversation, but maybe video isn't necessary. You're not going to share a screen or something like that. But if you are, the cool thing is if you are on a Zoom phone call and you do decide that you need that screen share or you need to annotate something or whatever, you can convert your phone call to a meeting really easily.
That's great. That's great. And you already, I think, answered what was going to be my next question, but would love just to double down there. Love the 3 A's, love the decision trees. If we were to jump into one of your own Zoom meetings, what else might feel different than the virtual meetings that we might be hosting on our side?
Well, again, like I said, we are always thinking about how much the world has changed and hybrid and remote work being here to stay. We, again, like to leverage as many of our solutions as we can. We use something that was recently released, which is our Zoom apps. That is the in-product integration that allows you to utilize your favorite apps right in Zoom. So natively use it in Zoom. So we're probably leveraging a lot of those things that maybe our customers aren't quite there yet. But it does it allows us as Zoom to essentially meet our customers where they're at. So if you're using Mural or Asana or Dropbox or anything like that, among many others, you can do so right in there. And again, like I said, we're kind of using the full suite within Zoom. So
That,
we encourage everyone else to as well.
That's great. That's great. The Zoom apps are a really interesting area to explore. You mentioned something there. You obviously are on the front lines working with some of Zoom's largest customers. What are those customers kind of dealing with right now? What are some of the challenges that you're hearing?
Yeah, I would say some of the most common challenges are going to be just around efficiency and effectiveness. How can we be less fatigued at the end of the day due to, the number of meetings that we have? And specifically, we hear a lot about how frustrating it is to leave a meeting and know that you need to schedule another meeting because you didn't, achieve your desired outcome. You didn't get to the conclusion you wanted to. You didn't get the approval that you needed or something. So then you're adding on additional meetings. We also hear that people don't have the literal time to move from one meeting to the next, let alone making a mental transition. So if I think about one of our Fortune 10 energy providers, for example, they brought use case similar to those, but more specifically about their cross-functional meetings. So when they're trying to bring people from, lots of different business units and whatnot, hasn't gone that well. So if I think about it, or you think about it, typically when you're within your own organization, in my case, customer success, or I'm talking to an established customer, we're already on the same track. We're going to get more accomplished in less time because we're already focused on the same thing. But this particular customer wanted guidance around these cross-functional meetings. And of course, we introduced the 3 A's as the fundamentals or the foundation of how to do it better. But we also encourage the use of things like annotations and polling for audience engagement. If you're talking about sales and you're in customer success, you might be more apt to multitask. So bring some of those things in to keep people interested. Breakout rooms to support larger groups, or breakout rooms if you have multiple decisions that need to be made simultaneously in that same meeting window. Again, I mentioned exploring Zoom apps. There's great icebreakers in there. If you're sharing documents through Dropbox or something, you can bring all that up and have your collective team there. Also, we encouraged them to take non-agenda items offline into an IM or an email to keep the meeting on task. That's often how we end up not staying on task. And then another customer, a large retailer, asked about best practices around just reducing the number of meetings. They're just having too many meetings. So of course, we encourage them to evaluate, do you really need a meeting? Use the decision tree, leverage templates if you do decide that you need to have a meeting. That will help expedite the meetings and hopefully not have that residual need for a residual meeting. You can also send materials in advance. A lot of people don't take advantage of that. You can attach them to your calendar invitation, especially if you have a detailed agenda. That's a great pre-read as well. We have a timer app in Zoom apps. You can perform calendar hygiene. Again, that's a couple things there. Recurring meetings, go through and check it out. Do you really need to have that one that you've had for a year every week? Could you change it to bi-weekly or monthly? Also shortening meetings by 5 minutes. These kind of micro changes can really add up and reduce your meeting load.
Love the idea of micro changes. We're running up against the start of our panel here. I just want to ask you one last question, which is super important. What we hear obviously from a lot of people as well as our own colleagues is one of the biggest challenges of both virtual and hybrid meetings, making sure everyone has a voice, making sure everyone gets heard. Do you have any tips for running a meeting more effectively to really make sure that all participants get heard?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate a few things. The 3 A's to set expectations. Polling is a great way, beginning, end, in meeting in real time to check for understanding, gauge people's interest. We also have Smart Gallery in our Zoom rooms, which brings everybody into their own window, even if they're just sitting next to each other in a conference room. Encourage people to use those reactions, raise their hands, heart something. Use your camera when you can. We know that that's not always possible. And then utilizing in-meeting chat for introductions. So if you have a large group, have everybody drop a little bio in the chat. Use QA, keep it interactive. And then from voice, sorry about that. In terms of the accessibility, just wanted to say that, you know, Zoom does have closed captioning, live transcription, and language interpretation. And that's growing quite a bit. That will be evolving quite a bit.
Those are great new features to have, and love your encouragement on the interactivity. I feel like those are things that we could all use a little bit more to keep meetings going and to keep the conversation flowing. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ronnie, and for Zoom's great partnership around the launch of Protocol Workplace. And I'm looking forward to tuning into Zoomtopia in a few weeks. So excited to hear from you and from the rest of the team again there soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion today.
Thanks so much, Ronnie. Now I'm excited to introduce Protocol Editor-at-Large David Pearce, our moderator for today's discussion, who's going to introduce our panel and get us started. David, over to you.
Thanks, Bennett. Awesome. Like Bennett said, my name is David Pearce. I'm the editor-at-large at Protocol, and we are about to get way into the weird weeds of the future of meetings, and I could not be more excited about this. I realized just before this started that this is basically an opportunity for all of us to sort of casually throw shade at everyone we've ever had bad meetings with. So I encourage as much of that as possible. But let's just jump in here. So rather than have me introduce all of you, I'm just going to make you introduce yourselves, and we'll just do it in the order I see you on my screen, which means Annie, you're up first.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today, David. My name is Annie Pearl. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Calendly. And for those of you who don't know, Calendly is a modern scheduling platform for high-performing individuals and teams. So we're really just trying to automate the whole meeting lifecycle and take all that work of back and forth out of scheduling.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Let's see, going clockwise, Mariano, you're up next.
Hello, I'm Mariano. I run a company called Mural, and one of the Zoom apps that Ronnie was mentioning before. And we help teams not only be able to teleport people through Zoom and what they're saying, but also a space, a visual space in which they can collaborate and think together, and running away games to help them think, to help them go through very challenging problems that happen in workshops and project rooms in the old world.
Awesome. Love it. And last but not least, Sunny.
The old world. Yes, I bring people into the new world. So hi Annie, how are you? Good to see you again. And David, thanks for having us. I am a speaker and an author and a facilitator, a multi-sensory facilitator. And so kind of like what Mariano was talking about, I love to create experiences for people that are meaningful, interesting, experiential, and purposeful. And so I've devoted a lot of time and energy to doing that. Yeah. And we can totally throw shade like at any point and also get in the weeds. Big fan.
Perfect. It's gonna be great. Yeah, again, thank you all for being here. This is gonna be very fun. So I want this to be as sort of tactical and practical and like helpful as possible. But with that said, I also want to just start at like the highest possible, most like philosophical level about meetings. Because like they were saying at the beginning, we all sort of agree that meetings are terrible and we have too many of them. And yet nothing ever changes. Mariano doesn't agree with this.
I mean,
okay, bad meetings are terrible.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of meetings that suck, of course, but the prompt in the social media, although provocative, I don't agree. I have loved certain meetings, right? And of course, like certain moments in meetings too, when we are actually doing something interesting. So the provocation that we all hate meetings is okay for provocation. I mean, I was sharing this visual the other day of a book that I found. I said, like, okay, the perception is like, yeah, meetings suck and they're a fucking waste of time. I'm quoting here, but it's a problem because again, there's a lot of magic that happens with multidisciplinary teams riffing on something and understanding problems from different perspectives. So yeah, this is the problem. The fact that this is a problem, and that's why we should be talking about it more and doing something about it.
No, I love that. I totally agree. And so I think that actually gets to the sort of big question of like, what is the purpose and point of a meeting? And I feel like the thing that has come into sort of particular focus for me over the last year and a half has been figuring out meetings sort of happened naturally in a lot of places. And I think for better and for worse, it was really easy to just walk over to someone's office or gather people in a conference room. But now that stuff is having to happen much more intentionally, because that's just the way the world is. We're all at home. There's just more work associated in bringing people together. And so I feel like it's forced us to answer this question of like, what is a meeting? Like, at what point does something go from, you could have just sent this in an email, to you could have just done this in a Slack message, to like, no, this is the thing we actually need to be together for. And Sunny, I know this is something you've done a lot of thinking about. So let's start with you. Like, what is sort of that rubric in your head?
Well, I would like to talk about my in-laws for a second. So this will dovetail back to what you're saying. So I have noticed, and I am not saying I cracked the code, but I would say that I've done a lot of experimentation, and I have noticed that there's a fundamental sort of misunderstanding about what people need to know and why and when. And so my in-laws actually embody this in this marvelous / irritating way, which is like when they're trying to gather people, for example, for like a family vacation, they have this like email thread that everyone is fundamentally inherently on, even though there are like 90% of it I don't need to know, I don't need to be updated about. And so I thought to myself, what is the underlying belief system? Because I think there's actually beliefs, operative and visible beliefs about gathering and meetings that people are just running without thinking. So like when Ronnie was saying we should pause and just fundamentally pause and say, is this even necessary? So there's not even a moment where somebody who's like part of this tribal behavior where they say, is this even necessary? So like the pause is huge. And so, but the fundamental belief in this particular tribe, but I also see it reflected in companies, is that it's like rude or it's exclusive or it's hurtful to gather without other people being, quote, invited. And so so there's a perception that it's binary. It's like either you're in or you're out. And that is not, it should be questioned. That belief fundamentally should be questioned because it's more about being respectful of people's time. So if you flip the script on it, you start to understand there's an opportunity there. And my in-laws are fine. I'm just saying.
Just like a fewer emails might be.
Yeah, I'm always like, help me out, people, help me. I'm not running that show, so I don't get to choose. Yeah.
I would just double down on, I think I'd separate almost quantity and quality. Right. I think we've always had a quantity problem of like, there's too many meetings. Every company I've ever worked for, it's like, we're having meeting culture, does this really have to be an meeting? Could it just be an email? So I think there's quantity. And I do think the rise of remote work and hybrid work has actually increased quantity because you no longer have those organic, in person, run over to someone's desk and ask them a question. So everything has to be scheduled. So meetings have increased, but I don't know that the quantity really matters. I think it's more quality, right? And that typically, truthfully, most meetings don't have a clear goal. They don't have an agenda. They don't, the participants don't know what their role is. They don't understand what they're being asked to do. And so then the participants get there. There's no prep work. They're not briefed on what they're supposed to do. They turn their cameras off and they disengage. Right. So I think it's the quality of the meetings is really more than just sort of like the quantity is the real issue. And that really starts with the host kind of owning the success of the meeting. And I think really the host often thinks about like, I just have to get it scheduled and then we'll just figure it out when we all get in the room. And that, contributes to the waste of time and the feeling like I'm in meetings all day and they're all a waste of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing I've actually heard a bunch is that there is this expectation that the only thing you have to do before the meeting is schedule the meeting. And that actually most of the work of a meeting should get done before you actually end up in a room together.
100%.
Which is a total like inversion for me of how I think about what a meeting is, but seems to be a much more productive way to do this stuff.
The thing, so I want to talk about like a meeting is a moment in time where you get together to do something, but it's you need to accomplish something. It's like, okay, you're launching a new product, you're changing a strategy, whatever, or like defining a plan, right? That's the thing that you are doing. Sometimes there's things that you do there by yourself. Sometimes is that we need to collaborate with people. If you acknowledge that, well, we're a gathering of people like and riffing to understand problems, to come up with possibilities, and that moment in time is important, if and only if it helps you towards the outcome of whatever process you're trying to improve, change, or whatever, right? So that's the first thing. And then the other thing that there's two interesting concepts. One is like meetings according to Steelcase and a lot of years of studying, not remote but meetings in general, there's informative moments, evaluative moments, and there's generative moments, right? So if you spend most of your time in your meetings informing, probably that could have been done in a Slack, a video, or a report, right? Evaluative, of course, there's some friction there, so it's interesting to have some debate. So those parts are like welcome. And of course, the most interesting one is generative, right? Because you start to build on top of different people's perspectives and ideas and so forth. So, and the last thing that I want to say is like, we are paying a lot of attention to this thing now because of the pandemic, and now the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, we're now coming back to probably some sort of like Delta protection. But the last year, we spend all this time like thinking about, okay, being aware of the other guy in the phone booth and turning on all of the mechanics of teleporting each other or saving the time. We're now starting to pay attention on what the guys talked about, quality, which is basically the scripts, the roles, the purpose, the visuals to get these meetings from conversations to actually workshopping together. Which is the most interesting part of meetings that, again, I consider. Of course, I'm biased because our software allows you to do that, right? But informative meetings, evaluative meetings, generative meetings, or moments in meetings more than full meetings. But again, I'm optimistic because we are all paying a lot of attention to this thing, right? And the magic about being digital first is that these things can be copied and pasted, which is spectacular.
Totally.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Sunny.
Well, I have a question actually for all of you, which is like, have you noticed that remote experiences do support more mindfulness about bringing people? Like, I feel I would love to know I don't know if we have research on that yet, but I think it's an open question because Annie, like you said, people are sort of reactively scheduling. So just be like, oh, if you put it on the calendar, then we just all show up. So it's really an inquiry about like, how is that affecting our relationship with intentionality, the remote piece? Because do people get together on Zoom and just have nothing to do? I haven't seen it because it's my job to design good experiences, but is that happening?
I do think there is less of a need to think about the quantity of people because you don't have the constraints of the room. Right. So that was a reality when you were, in a world where everyone's going to be in the same room. We kind of had to be pretty intentional around to the point around the types of meeting. Like if this is a generative meeting and we're trying to brainstorm in person, we want to be in a space that, we're going to be able to do that well. Yeah. I think people can get lazy in terms of just adding more people to the invite when in a virtual setting, there's no capacity constraints. So I have seen that for sure.
That makes sense.
And I think the flip side of it, and Annie, I'm curious how you've seen this too, but the flip side is what I've heard anecdotally is that people have learned a lot over the last, 18 months about how to be more protective of their own time. And like you were saying before, Sunny, there's been all this research that says, we're just sort of flipping between too many meetings and people are just showing up with no idea what to do. And there's like dropping off a Zoom call and then immediately 1 second later going to another Zoom call is this like horribly exhausting experience. And I was goofing around in Calendly the other day, Annie, and seeing the sort of buffer time that you can change between meetings, which actually feels like a very important thing to say, like, every meeting I need 15 minutes before I can do anything else. But I'm curious kind of how you've seen people even protecting their own time going into that stuff.
Yeah. And I think for, in this remote world or hybrid world or world where I do think that the volume of meetings has increased because you have to be more intentional, I think people do need to be much more protective of their calendar. So from a product perspective, we're always thinking about how do we create features and functionality to give you more control of your availability. So when you're sending a Calendly link, you can decide, what times of the day do you want to be offering time? How many days during the week? Is there a maximum number of meetings you want to have during the day? What are those buffers between meetings? So actually using technology and, scheduling automation platforms like a Calendly to actually give you more control. I think some people assume if I'm sending out a Calendly link, all of a sudden everyone can schedule with me whenever they want. But in reality, at least our job is to help give you all those rules to really control your time and to control your availability while also making sure that you're able to find time to meet, mutually available time with other people as well.
I feel like you need a mandatory field that just says link me to an agenda or you don't get to schedule a meeting with me.
Prove the value of this moment.
Exactly.
Mariano, what were you going to say?
So something else, and now Annie made me think about something different. So before that, I say like we were all brute forced into this experiment, right? So we are all lab rats. We've been lab rats in the last year, so no one had the excuse to not be inconsiderate with someone else because they were finally one of the people in the little box over there that was trying to speak and was muted for an hour and no one realized, right? So we all become that person. So we can empathize a little more, even if we're not empathetic, because again, even if you're not empathetic, you've been there. So that's a good news, right? Everyone in the world has been that person that has been like, you're muted, right? So they've all been there. So I think that people have been spending enough time talking about which is their preferred video conferencing software of choice, which is something that no one in the history of the world did 2 years ago, right? Like it's like, which is your favorite, horrible shirts or things like that, but not, Zoom or Teams or whatever. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying that, but the point is like, it's a topic, right? It's a topic and it's important. It's a topic. Now the next level is like it's Maslow hierarchy of meetings, right? So like, okay, it's not just about having the time, not about having a good audio, video, or whatever. Now it's like the content of those meetings, understanding that, again, that's the thing I want to say with Annie. It's like, it's a moment in time, that meeting, right? It's moved something forward. So the next feature that I need, Annie, from you guys, like stitch, not with an agenda, just David, it's like, what is this meeting helping you in terms of the OKRs of this company or in terms of this project, right? Because it's a sequence of things that need to happen. There's like synchronous work in a quick kickoff, asynchronous work, individual work in preparation for the next one. Let's get together because Joe needs to report back on this and we need to riff on that idea. All of that is like, it's like a rhythm of business that happens through the year that, again, a meeting is just a moment in time to accomplish that.
Yeah. Well, and on that prep work, I'm curious from all three of you sort of what it looks like to mandate that to some extent, because I think that goes back on the list that a lot of people intellectually understand that, like, yes, we should have done some of the work ahead of time. There should be pre-reading. We should walk into the room ready to discuss rather than sort of starting from scratch. But I feel like in practice, that just happens so rarely. So like, especially like all of you have sort of been in positions where you can say to people, here's what is required. Like, is there a form people have to fill out? Do you have a checklist? Like, how do you sort of set and enforce those rules?
Well, before the pandemic, again, it became famous in the 6-pager in Amazon, right? Where again,
exactly.
they start the meeting just reading the memo. But again, I consider that spectacular and a waste of time at the same time. It's a paradox right there. Because again, why do we need to gather together to read or watch a video? You can do that again on the train or whatever, again, or in between the other Zoom meetings. But that's a best practice that will be super popular soon. And there's tracking systems, right? So you say, hey, don't come to the meeting if you don't read this. There's like, DocSend or the asynchronous videos, they all have like, who's watched this? Right. So if you have not watched this, you're not allowed even to this meeting. And if you're allowed to this meeting once or twice a dollar, you put $1, and it goes to charity or something. But you're not prepared for a meeting. And again, the meeting, as I said, it's not a meeting. It's like a series of things that need to happen in order for you to solve a problem and come up with possibilities. And one of the things, like, be aware of the informative part of the meeting. And so let's maximize together time for evaluative and generative, not for informative.
Yeah, I'd echo. I think we really like to think about the whole meeting life cycle, right? So that's pre-meeting activities, that's getting clear on the agenda, the goals, the prep work, are the right people there? Then there's what happens during the meeting, which is a lot of those activities that, we're just talking about in terms of brainstorming or collaborating or discussing. And then post-meeting, it's following up on the action items and sending out a survey and sending out thank yous. And really, a meeting is just one part of a larger, oftentimes, project or a larger set of meetings. And I think that takes education, right? It takes like helping the company understand how to think about the life cycle of the meeting. And for us, at least, we're trying to automate a lot of that, right? The more that we can automate, agendas being attached to the calendar invite and the pre-meeting, the pre-reads attached to the calendar invite, and automatically having the Zoom link or the Mural board so you can collaborate in real time and automatically sending the thank you note afterwards, right? We're trying to really automate a lot of that so that you can take some of that tedious work away to make the meeting itself most effective. But I think in absence of the automation, most people just don't think about the life cycle. They really think about, again, kind of that meeting itself. So that's at least how we're kind of approaching it, is how do we help users and automate a lot of the meeting life cycle so that they can really focus on the most important work, which Mariano's point is the brainstorming, it's the generative work, it's the discussion in the meeting.
I have to say, I love the idea of replacing like a swear jar with a didn't do the pre-reads jar. It's a truly fantastic idea.
Yeah,
And I feel like would make a lot of money. Very quickly.
Yeah, he's describing like punitive versus reward systems to like support people, or scare them into it, whatever. But to Annie's point, that it's like a meeting hygiene, it's like a literacy. And so there's an educational component, but also you can buffer it with what she's describing, which is like having people create systems and put those systems in place so you don't actually have to educate the entirety of the population, because that's the place of it's not necessarily a hopelessness, but I always think about like, because we spend a lot of time educating people on visual literacy. So using that medium to support the acceleration of knowledge acquisition. So you don't even have to mess around with educating people in these pieces of time. But the reality, when you face the reality of human education, is that you actually have to have systems in place to just not require people to know those things. And so I think that whoever is responsible for conducting those meetings responsibly, if they even have a basic framework, like the AAA system, that Ronnie described, or what I call the 7 Ps. So the AAA is maybe a more elegant approach, but I have one called the 7 Ps that when you do really robust generative meetings is actually helpful. So even educating at a certain layer matters, because they're the ones usually leading the charge. There's specific people charged with that stuff. And weirdly, people get educated by osmosis. Like if you've never seen a functional meeting, then you don't even have the language for what that looks like. But once you find yourself in one, you're like, oh, it's like a dysfunctional family or a functional family. You're like, oh, this is what a functional family looks like, right? And I love that I keep bringing in families, but they're like tribes, they're gatherings. They're not dissimilar to, temporary familial gatherings. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I just think it's an interesting and important thing to talk about for sure. Yeah.
But Sunny, so when you use the word osmosis, it reminds me of the infamous water cooler situations or the ping pong table drawing culture. So it's like we are kind of like relying on osmosis or water coolers or ping pong tables to do things that maybe if we are diligent and explicit about, we can speed up. Like, for example, I've been in a lot of educational workshops where the first 7, 10, 20 minutes are there to explain, what a customer journey map is, right? And why it's important and so forth. In the example here, quick one. What if, like, again, another moment to unbundle, right? Like we train a lot of our people to like, this is a customer journey map, this is what it is. And hopefully everyone in the company with tools like this one knows what a customer journey map is, so that when you start a meeting, you don't spend the first 15 minutes because the experts, not again. I know what a customer journey map is. Like, don't spend the first 15 minutes informing me what a customer journey map is. So there's also like, you mentioned like visual literacy and some other things. What have you seen like when you get to an audience of people that they're all like leveled up? Maybe they're not masters, but at least they're all like playing along together because they know the rules of play and the methods of play.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen in cultures or teams that are more aware of that and versus the ones that you need to like level them up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think rules of play is a good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the sort of in the room experience. And Mariano, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is that you and I talked a few weeks ago about your sort of theory of games instead of meetings. And you made a very convincing case that meetings should be run more like Dungeons and Dragons games than traditional business meetings. Can you sort of explain this theory to us?
Yeah, well, but it's not my theory. I stole it from Sunny.
Okay, perfect. That's why Sunny's here too. That was a perfect transition.
Wrote a book called Game Storming, right? And of course, there's a lot of again roles, participants, what each of them need to be doing. My point with Dungeons and Dragons was that the role, full-time job or role of the meeting facilitator. I mean, I don't like the word host or moderator. I think it's facilitator because it facilitates conversations and time, use of time, and so forth. That is something that it's super important, and we see some of our customers have people that are like almost full-time facilitators and are aware and helping other teams inside their large companies. And of course, sometimes they're hired through consultants like Sunny to help them go through that very important strategic planning session or team building exercise or again, different types of things. But yeah, I mean, rules of play in terms of participants, in terms of like, okay, here are the different game boards that we're doing with some education on which each step of the game is there to accomplish what. But yeah, I'm just like a messenger here. Like, I mean, ask her. I mean, she's the one that.
Yeah, Sunny, I do want you to say more, but I also, one of the questions I had about this is, I think the people who usually end up sort of facilitating or running the meeting tend to be either the person who created the meeting in the first place or the like senior most person in the room. And I get the sense that those might not always be the right people as you're imagining them to be kind of the facilitators. Is that right?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a skill. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be outstandingly phenomenal at it. Like really at a basic fundamental level, the most respectful thing you can do for the people showing up, if you don't have aspirations for being a master facilitator, you're not particularly a people person, maybe you're an introvert, maybe you hate standing up and delivering, right? Like, but if say you happen to find yourself in the hot seat and that's your requirement for your job, then the most fundamental thing you can do is have in the game storming book, it's open, explore, and close. So it follows the same arc of like a good book or a good movie or a good game. And yes, I am the dungeon master, but if you don't want to be the dungeon master, you just need to have a real foundational understanding of how do I respect the time and move the energy forward in a meaningful way. And you can do that without being trained, and you can do that without being, deeply schooled. And also you can do that if you're shy. Like that structure actually supports shy people in a way. It supports introverted people because the structure itself is a scaffolding to get people into a meaningful place without you having to be like a badass. Do you know what I mean? Does that answer your question a little?
I mean, it makes sense. It sounds like a pretty tall ask, especially for a lot of people who are, used to running these kinds of meetings. Like if I'm, just a person who runs a team, if I'm Annie, should I hire somebody to be sort of my full-time meeting facilitator? Like, are there skills I can learn? Should I just read your book and all my problems are solved? Like, what's the sort of
sticky notes solve all the problems, digital and analog sticky notes. But no, I think it depends on the meeting and the goal, right? And I'm sure Annie would agree, having seen in triplicate these things unfolding. So it's very context specific, like if you're doing an all hands, you don't really need an outside facilitator. But like to Mariano's point, if you're doing a generative or an offsite, or you're like, I facilitated a 3-day, they were trying to do intellectual property patent, ideas for telecom. Yeah, you need some people that there's a whole lot of reasons that I won't unpack at the moment because I will talk for way too long, but there's a lot of reasons to hire outside support or to have dedicated internal facilitators, but it's very context specific. So Annie, I feel like you have a perspective on that too.
No, the only thing going through my head is I like this open, explore, close framework. At Calendly, we're very focused on external meetings. Mm-hmm. So we do really well in, for sales reps and for customer success reps and for, recruiting, anyone who's doing a heavy amount of external scheduling. Mm-hmm. And then, making, of course, it all goes back to the outcome, right? The client outcome for any of those different departments. As Mariano kept talking about, it's about the outcome of the meeting. It's not just the meeting of itself. And so what I like about that is, even in those examples where it's not generative, you're not brainstorming, you're coming to hopefully get to an outcome. And so I like that framework of like the open, explore, close, even if it's not a big, sticky note brainstorming session, to ultimately deliver, to ultimately do whatever you're trying to do in terms of a client outcome. So if you're trying to close the sales, a prospect, you're trying to recruit a candidate, you're trying to, help make a customer more successful and close a support ticket, regardless of what that meeting sort of goal is or the outcome you're trying to drive, that framework, I think, is a really great way to structure the meeting to consistently sort of drive the outcome. So I like that a lot.
Oh, thank you.
And Annie, I'm curious what you think about from sort of a product perspective, how much of that you feel like Calendly can be part of? Because like you were saying, you want to automate a lot of the sort of process stuff around a meeting, but is there stuff kind of in the room, in the moment, that you feel like you can sort of build product around making some of that work better?
I think potentially. I think it's also one of those areas where there's amazing companies and products like Mural that already facilitate a lot of in-meeting collaboration, or Otter.ai, who does meeting transcription. And, there's a lot of in-meeting tools that I think we can really build a robust ecosystem around. So we can, part of the meeting lifecycle isn't just the pre-meeting, during meeting, and post-meeting, but it's how do we plug in different partners who can help, who are experts in different parts of the meeting lifecycle. And then our job is to kind of string it all together and kind of automate it. So there may be opportunities, but I think so far our strategy has really been let's partner with the best in the business for how to make meetings most productive, and have really, really seamless integration. Zoom is another very close partner of ours to automatically, create video conferencing experiences for virtual meetings as well. So that's been our strategy, at least to date.
But David, coming back, I someone in that meeting needs to have the role of facilitating. Right? So it could be full-time, could be not full-time, could be an expert, not so much, and so forth. But someone is, because if no one does it, it's like it happens. And if you again, similarly, if you leave it to chance, 50-50, right? So someone paying attention for sure. Now, the team leader also facilitating if they need to participate, if they just need to decide. I've been there, and it's hard, right? And so sometimes there might be someone else that can take that job, and it's not a glorified sticky note taker, right? Like ideally, we are all participating into note taking or sketching or putting together a diagram and so forth. But it's someone who has, again, the job is like to make sure that that drop of productivity doesn't happen, because there's value in hopefully different perspectives that are coming into that room. So
does that person end up being basically like the sort of glorified time cop, or is there more to the kind of facilitation you're talking about?
That's what I was saying. Like if it becomes a glorified time cop, a time cop can be automated, right? So we have a timer functionality in our software.
Yeah.
That's not it though. It's like asking, making sure that everybody participates, making sure that again we ask like provocative questions. And again, I'll let Sunni give us a story or something, but help encourage people to think laterally. There's many. Of course, like bringing the safety. The abstraction level and observation is also super important. Some people say like, okay, what's the biggest problem in your team? Transparency. And then Joe over there did not disclose. So it's different levels of abstraction, the same observations, right? So there's all these things that make you go from like a timekeeper to, again, an enhancer of possibilities. So Sunni, what's
yes.
Yeah, there you go. See?
Yes, and that. So, David, there's a part of me that was like horrified about even the notion of a glorified time cop, because yes, so I have multiple roles. One is I teach people and coach people and mentor people into how to support meetings. And I want them to know that they can DIY. There are pieces of that they can absolutely DIY, and they should. And I encourage experimentation, risk-taking, and so forth. And if somebody's not ever going to become a master facilitator, they can still be effective. So that's my teacher part, right? And then there's my master facilitator part. And there are 100% meetings. And I'll give an example, like you said, Mariano, a little story. So pharmaceutical company, 3-day offsite. They were in the middle of the pandemic. All of their research scientists were having to hustle like motherfuckers to get the vaccine created. Like, this is high pressure. They're exhausted. They have burnout. They are all like, under the gun. They're competing against the other vaccine makers. And they have a 3-day offsite. So it's me and my friend, Jesse Sternshish, shout out to Jesse. We come in and we design a very elaborate multi-sensory experiential time together, a gathering that you could call it a meeting, but it was really like a come to Jesus or come to Buddha or whatever your practice is, that a time cop could not have even remotely even attempted to do, right? So that's the sort of concierge level of gathering. And that's why when you see the transformative power of that kind of skill, then it's just that the spectrum is very wide, right? But it's not that you need that type of heavy lifting most of the time, but when you do, it's a big deal, right? So in that moment, they were weary, they were in transition, and my dog wants to weigh in. And it couldn't be done by an internal person because they already have their known entities, and they also have leadership styles that don't support real, true, open ideation and real exploratory and real provocation. So there's just times, and that is a problem that you have to design a solution for, and you have to identify that problem. So that's me on my soapbox a little bit, but I'm just saying, like, a time cop, I will get you, man. I will get you.
That's fair. I bet. Yeah. Annie, do you think you're a good facilitator? When you, like, as you think about this and yourself running meetings, like, how do you feel?
What was going through my head is sort of the question around the person who's responsible for the outcome of the meeting, and then the person who might be the best facilitator. Yeah. So, like, we're talking about just more sort of day-to-day generic meetings, and maybe, to Mariano's point, these are not the most important meetings. In fact, they're more informed meetings, but like the person who creates the meeting, the host, is responsible for the outcome. And making sure it's productive and making sure there's the, you're achieving the results. And that may be not the person who's going to be the best facilitator, right? So to the question to me, like, oftentimes I say, okay, I need to get my product leadership team together, and we need to do an ideation session to think about our, next 6-month roadmap through the lens of this problem that we're trying to solve. I'm not necessarily the best person to go facilitate that ideation session, but I'm responsible for the outcome, right? I'm getting everyone together. I want to make sure it's well run. I have an end in mind, a goal in mind. And so, I think I personally try to make sure I have the right person in the room who can do that most effectively, when it's not necessarily where I'm going to be, have the best skills, but I ultimately have to be the one to own that and make sure that person's in the room if it's not me. So that was what was going through my head.
So, and do you tell that person ahead of the meeting, like, listen, I know I called this meeting, I know I'm in charge here, but like, this is your show?
Yeah, definitely. And sort of, do the prep with them around how we're going to run the agenda, how we're going to use the time, what role they want me to play. Definitely align with them ahead of time to make sure they know what their role is and they're set up for success.
Oh my God, Annie, I see a world in which we get to collaborate.
There we go. Look at that. I love it.
Because then we could have fun. And also co-ownership is so important, David. So I was just like thinking about how for people that, to her point, are not necessarily going to be the lead, they can still get a great cabinet or a great collaborator, and then they own that outcome and they're both responsible for it. And that is actually a beautiful tango. It's a really nice dance when it goes well.
I like that. And how do we, sorry, go ahead, Mariano.
That in a way, like, again, I use sports analogies, whatever. But again, when you go into a soccer field, I'm from Argentina, that's why the analogy, football. Again, in a way, like, who's playing forward, defense, whatever, what's the tactics and so forth, like, we're gonna be using some more of that. And I mean, okay, who's facilitating this one, or who's making a decision on this one, or there's gonna be more savviness on that, and we're just not gonna walk into a meeting like zombied out, and we're gonna be more diligent about it. And when it comes to, like, I want to, like, self-ask my question: Am I a good facilitator? Probably not, right? But I do some scaffolding, right? So I try to open up meetings with the goal of the meeting. My leadership team, I introduced the idea of, like, again, sharing feelings, like feeling like I was sick one week, like 3-4 months ago, and it's like, okay, I cannot work today. So, like, guys, I cannot work today. Like, I'm gonna be like 10% of brain power today. But introduce that and give that permission, and then of course trying to rate meetings. But then I forget because I'm playing. So it is a hard, cognitively demanding role. But again, once you have a great facilitating meeting and a poorly one, like, that one didn't work as well.
Well, and I think to some extent, the amount of work in that, I actually, even as we talk about this, I'm coming to like the amount of work that requires, because there are a lot of things where you don't need to do that much work. And that means it probably shouldn't be a meeting. Like if it doesn't need this entire life cycle, it's probably not a thing you need to spend, hours of somebody's time dealing with. And you can either just chat for 5 minutes or Slack or email or whatever. And so I think actually thinking about meetings as these like big resource intensive things, I think kind of freaks people out, but might actually be a useful headspace to put all of these things in.
When you were asking, what are the sort of qualities or frameworks that teams use to determine, does this need to actually be a meeting? And like that's an important piece of it, right? Is this highly complex? Is this require brainstorming? Does this require deep discussion? Those types of questions I think are really helpful. And so like the magnitude of the meeting actually feeling bigger is a good thing, because it's showing you couldn't do this asynchronously. So it would require, a lot of back and forth on Slack or whatever tool you might be using for asynchronous communication. And you'll be a lot more effective in the outcome of what you're trying to drive if you get into a room and really facilitate it.
Totally. I love that. Okay, so we have like 10 minutes left, and I think we should use it to talk about the other part of the meeting, which is the like after we hang up the Zoom call or the Teams call or the phone or walk out of the conference room or whatever. And Mariano, I want you to start here, because I think you build a tool where people, open up a whiteboard, they spend a bunch of time brainstorming, they're doing all this work together, and then it's over. We get to the end of an hour, we like awkwardly make small talk for 5 minutes, and then somebody goes, "We're done here," right? And then you hang up. What's next? What's supposed to happen kind of right at the end of a meeting?
So what's supposed to, it's like, I'm not the god of meetings, but what are things that are best practice that we've seen? Sometimes as I said, when it's important to rate those meetings in a way, we still cannot find like the right rating system, because like 1 to 10 is like, wow, there's like probably like in facilitation, there's like content shared, like decisions made are all like vectors of rating. So again, we have not nailed it, but I think it's at least being aware of it is important, even though the results, who cares? And of course, the typical things, right? Action items and making sure that someone has the job of distilling them and going ahead. One interesting thing about Mural is that we don't have the entity of, we kind of like starting now of like meeting, right? It's like an evergreen piece of content that you can iterate over time. That's why like the idea of like, it's like a rhythm of business, right? And then one thing is like, okay, rhythm, there's a rhythm of the meeting too, of course. But what happens next is like, again, we need to keep on going, right? And that's maybe like, again, asynchronous work, there's individual work, there's like couples work, there's sub-teams work. We didn't talk about breakout rooms in Zoom and others, but that's during the meeting a very good use of time on zooming in and drilling in. And there's techniques in facilitation around like splitting a big group into small chunks of groups and then building on top of each other, individual time in the meeting too. So I mean, after the meeting, again, spend time to rate, spend time to carry over, and but that's again, I did not invent any of that stuff.
Fair enough. Annie, what about you? I know this is another place Calendly is spending time. I also discovered the automated thank you note that it can send after a meeting, which I think is just delightful. But what's your sense of kind of how you think about, I mean, we all sort of agree, right, that you should have action items at the end. You should have people responsible for those action items, and then everybody sort of goes their separate ways. But like, what parts of that are you thinking about?
Yeah, again, we're very focused on external scheduling and those customer outcomes. So thinking about the end of the meeting, what's the next step to drive the outcome that you're looking to do? Again, if you're recruiting, you're looking to close a candidate. If you're in sales, you're trying to close a prospect. And so you talked about a workflow tool that we've recently launched at the end of last year, really starts to automate a lot of those post-meeting activities. So we can automatically send out surveys and thank you notes and action items, and then schedule the next meeting, right? And so to Mariano's point, it's usually usually a series of, this is just one moment in time that then ties to the next meeting. So if this first meeting with a client was, or a prospect was the demo, the next meeting we might be talking about, price negotiation. And so we're really trying to think about how do we get you to that next step that's going to deliver the outcome. And we typically see, at least today, that's in forms of things like thank you notes and surveys and action items and scheduling that next meeting. But it's really kind of through that lens of ultimately helping you accomplish, the outcome of why you even scheduled the meeting in the first place.
Mhm.
Yeah, tying it back to that original, like, here is the ultimate point of this thing, seems to be sort of a recurring theme. It's like, let's not forget what we're actually, this is all in service of something, and let's keep remembering what that thing is.
Yep.
Sunny, what do you think?
Well, so I just want to give a shout out to the visual archiving piece, right? So part of game storming and part of the other methodologies that I am obsessed with, because not only because they're visually appealing, but because cognitively and physiologically, humans are more responsive to those mediums. So that the value of visual archiving is that you have a continuity, and not only a content and context continuity, but you actually have a visual record and an artifact of what occurred that you can then build on. And people that weren't at the meeting can come and visit that thing and get educated pretty quickly about that archive. And so in the pre-COVID days, which were so glorious, we used to do these like massive panoramics, these like giant, like I have photographs of events that I now feel nostalgic for, but they were just like huge panoramas that those pieces that people created, these visual structures and sort of architectures that people created. And I'm sure you guys do this when you're doing UX design and product development stuff. You take those pieces and you bring them to the next situation, and you can like massage and change and edit and tweak and then bring those in. So it's like a literal artifact that has continuity throughout. And so that's not a small contribution to do the visual thinking aspect. And thankfully you can now do that in software. So that's a huge deal, because when COVID hit, me and all my visual practitioner friends were like, what the hell are we going to do? Like, how are we going to translate our life and our experience to this medium? So, Mural was a big save the day. And I met Mariano like 10 years ago when we were both like little baby children. And so I was so happy to discover that it was robust and could do stuff, because it's not just pleasurable. It's very, very actionable and essential. So I just want to acknowledge the visual thinking piece is huge.
Yeah, I mean, and again, there you go. That's one example. Yeah, I mean, the artifacts, right? So when explaining something verbally is harder than explaining something visually, paradoxically, or at least like if the outcome is to like try to explain your idea to someone else. And that's super valuable, right? Like, don't talk about things in the abstract, but talk about them in again, at least visual form or interactive form. And of course, like the continuity of that, because again, maybe we didn't get to something enough done in the meeting, but we had some progress. Again, good news is that again, we can meet tomorrow again for another hour and keep progressing with that thing. So there's also this unbundling of like the big workshops that can happen. That is also interesting, because again, sometimes you don't have the luxury of having like 6 hours together. And I wouldn't recommend getting 6 hours in front of a screen anyway, because your brain fries.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the artifacts thing is a really interesting one to me, because I think you're right that it's great that it's easy to have collaborative documents or work on the digital whiteboards together. But I've also seen this push over the last year or so, where people are saying you should be recording all of your meetings on video and transcribing them and making like a searchable archive of every meeting you've ever had. And that sounds to me both like a sort of well-intentioned, terrible idea, I think. But it kind of goes both ways, right? Where I think it's good for sort of information transparency. It means you don't have to invite every single person to every single meeting. They can like search for their name, which is a thing I've heard people doing in these transcripts. But what I wonder is, as we sort of, if we get to the end of an interaction like this, to say kind of what do we take from this and what can we like leave in the room behind us, feels like a really important but also really kind of complicated question. So I guess like what do you guys think of the idea that we should have sort of perfectly preserved records of all of these meetings? Does that accomplish anything?
I think it kind of goes back to setting the norms around what you believe as a company to be the requirements to have the meeting, and then what are the artifacts that you believe after a meeting are going to be most helpful to be published, externally. And so I think it's a little even more important maybe around consistency than necessarily like a one size fits all, like everything needs to be recorded, and every company should adopt that. I think each company has their own culture and their own values and their own norms and ways of working. But I think it's important that it's very clear what those expectations are. And it may be that after every meeting, we use Confluence. So there's a Confluence page where you publish the mural board or the notes from the meeting and the action items. So I think it's maybe more important that you get really clear on what the expectations are and that people then actually follow through with it. Unless, at least for me, I haven't seen like a blanket, everything needs to be recorded or everything shouldn't be recorded. I haven't seen that play out, at least not in the companies that I've worked for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the only place that they do that kind of heavy archiving is the White House, like seats of government where they have legal ramifications. But I think to Annie's point, like the principle is what matters here and who needs to know it and how do we carry that information artifact forward. And if there's my husband has a tendency to archive our entire lives. And I always don't know why, it's just organizationally fascinating for him to do that. And so if there were a time capsule and he had all that stuff in there, someone would know like everything about us, but they wouldn't care. And so my point is like, who cares, right? You have to know, why does it matter? Why would you need to do that? Just because you can? That makes no sense. So nuance, like exactly to Annie's point, like nuance and calibration around the why is the biggest question to ask. And then from that understanding, what to do, Yeah.
Makes sense. I feel like who cares is like the perfect existential question to ask about every single part of a meeting. It's like that's
all the things.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, so we are basically out of time, but I'm gonna ask you all to do one quick thing before we go, which is let's say I'm a person who runs a team and I have daily meetings with that team. We do a stand-up meeting every morning and I want to run that slightly better than I have in the past. What's one thing you would tell me to start doing tomorrow? And you can't just say like, be more interesting. And if you don't have one off the top of your head, that's okay. I'll just be severely disappointed. But before we go, we'll do this real quick in reverse order. I made you introduce yourselves, which means Sunny, you get to go first.
And so that thing I'm answering is, what's the one thing that you would do right out of the gate?
Yeah, like there's a lot of big stuff here that I think people can do, but it's like, if I want to wake up tomorrow and make my meeting tomorrow better than the one today was, what's one thing you would tell me?
So open, explore, close. So open, what information needs to be here? Explore, what the hell are we doing with the information? Close, what decisions needs to be made about the information? I call it OEC, and that's just how I roll. And again, my dog's weighing in. Thank you.
Your dog's a fan. Open, explore, close. I like it. Mariano, you're up next.
Sorry.
Mariano, there we go. Don't mute yourself. Feels like a good one. That's a good start.
You're a unmuted guy today. And bad connectivity, by the way, I'm sorry. I would build on top of Sunny's idea, generative, and say, use a visual template to support your open, explore, and close. And you can use Mural because today we launch a free tier of our plan, so there's no excuses anymore.
Oh boy. Really teed you up for that one by accident.
You did me that softball, just softball.
I know, just right there for you. Annie, this is your opportunity. You can show for Calendly, or you can come up with something else.
Eliminate the back and forth of email when you're trying to schedule and use Calendly. But actually in the meeting, I think it is get really crisp on the goal, get really crisp on the agenda, and make sure every participant understand exactly what role you're asking them to play, and be outcome oriented when you're thinking about the end goal in mind of your meetings.
And get the role of the facilitator.
And there you go. Yeah, and figure out who your facilitator is if it's not you.
That's right. Annie, I love you. I see why you're in leadership. You're amazing.
Right back.
Well, I think all of you are, and I've done a bad job.
David, I love you.
I 3 minutes older. I love you too, Mariano. No, honestly, thank you all so much for doing this. This was so much fun. I learned a ton, and have much more shade to throw at everyone I work with now, and will finally be useful in meetings for the first time in my professional life. But again, thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone watching. This was awesome, and I hope something was useful. We will be talking about this lots more. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
And rate the Zoom. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.